Hi, Bree Stensrud here, and this video segment is going to be answering the question that so many in our community ask about in terms of helping people in their home country. A lot of times we get asked, what can I do? And then the very next question is, well, how do we help people in their home countries so they don't have to migrate to the US? And so I'm so thrilled that this segment is going to be with Joanne Van Engen, and she is the co-founder of A More Just Society, and she's going to be actually speaking to us from Honduras as she lives and works within the Northern Triangle, and so she's going to give us a great perspective on how to really help people in their home country. So Joe, tell us how you got started working in the Northern Triangle in Honduras.
All right, well, thanks so much for having me, Bree. I'm super excited about becoming part of Women of Welcome. I love you guys' vibe of compassion and curiosity and learning about what God's calling us to, especially in regards to immigration. So I'm excited to be here. So how we got to Honduras. I grew up in Michigan and went to a little college Christian college where I met my husband. And our senior year, a Christian development organization offered us the chance to go to Costa Rica for an internship for 2 years. And I would love to tell you that our response to that was to spend a long time in prayer trying to discern the will of God for our future. But that is not at all what happened. What happened is that I said, Costa Rica, where is that? And Kurt said, I think it's an island. And we were both like, cool, let's go. And a few months later, we were in Honduras and really thinking it was going to be, in Costa Rica, sorry, and thinking that it was going to be this, kind of extended honeymoon. We had just gotten married. We were going to have an adventure. And I think God was probably thinking it was all very hilarious because within a few months, we had just fallen in love with Central America, with just the beauty that is all around, kindness of people. We loved learning Spanish. We loved our jobs. And we stayed for 2 years in Costa Rica, and then we moved on to Honduras and really never looked back. We worked for a few more years with the development organization that had originally hired us, and then we went back to school and started a semester abroad program for college students that was focused on justice. What does biblical justice look like in countries in Central America? What does it look like in Honduras, where there are so many more challenges? And we've been running that program for over 20 years. It's been super cool to have these excited college students come and learn with us. And then we also started the Association for a More Just Society, which was our attempt to figure out how to do justice in this context, especially for the most vulnerable people, who are the ones who are often the victims of injustice, and figure out how to be brave Christians, kind of confronting the abuse of power that often leaves people so vulnerable and so poor. So those are kind of a number of hats, but that's what brought us to Honduras. And I also just want to say that I'm so glad that you asked me to talk about this question of how we can help in home countries. I've lived in Honduras for over 30 years now, and I have had so many prayerful conversations people about, do I go, don't I go? I feel like I don't have any choices anymore. And it is a question that nobody takes without thought. It's something that is a difficult decision to make. And, I think just about nobody wants to leave their home country. They want to stay, and they want to be connected to their family and to all the place where their memories are, the place where they speak the language. And when people do leave, it's because, there are things that are so bad that they feel like they don't have any choice. So thinking about what you can do in the home country so people don't have to leave is something that I'm really passionate about, because I would love to see all these people that I love being able to flourish. And they deserve that. I think that's what God wants for people. So if you put me in front of a camera and I get to talk about ways that your listeners can help people in their home country, that's awesome. So what I want to talk about, though, before we actually jump into how we help people in their home country, I wanted to talk a little bit about the factors that push people out. Because, like I said, people leave because things get hard, and they feel like they have no choices. So if we want to really help, if we want to make a difference, we have to focus on those factors that are making people leave their countries, the push factors. There's also pull factors that, like, what are the things that pull people to another country, but I'm not going to talk about those. My experience is all on the southern side of the border. Like I said, watching people leave, and I am definitely not an immigration expert, so I'm going to stick with the things that I know. So I'm just going to start out talking about three of probably the major push factors, the things that push people out of their countries. And the first one I want to mention is poverty. All over Central America, especially the Northern Triangle, which is Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, there is pretty desperate poverty. And I think I'll just talk a little bit about what that looks like. I live in a pretty poor neighborhood. I have for a long time. And a lot of my friends work so hard all the time. A lot of my friends in my neighborhood make tortillas, which is a really lengthy process involving boiling and grinding and shaping and cooking and then going out to sell. And at the end of the day, they'll maybe have made $10, $15. Others of my friends are security guards. They're working 48-hour, 72-hour shifts. Standing in front of a store, and they're making 90 cents an hour. That's minimum wage in Honduras right now. And I mean, it's impossible really to take care of your family on those kind of wages. And so, what can people do then? What are your options when you want to take care of your family? And then on top of that, another thing that's important when we look at poverty is that when people are poor, they are so much more vulnerable to any other bad thing that happened. So if we look at this past year, the pandemic has hit poor people so hard because, number one, if you get sick, it's very hard to get the treatment that you need if you're poor. But also, everybody's been quarantining really hard. So it's very hard to even find work to do because people are supposed to be staying home. So it's had a huge impact. And then just one more thing, natural disasters also make people so vulnerable when they're poor. And in Honduras, we, in November, just in an insane kind of happening, had 2 Category 5 hurricanes hit the country, hit Honduras and Nicaragua, in the same month, within 2 weeks of each other. The main airport of the country was completely underwater. The people were displaced from their homes. Their homes were lost. Most of the agriculture in the northern part of the country, Honduras grows lots of bananas and pineapple, and all of that was wiped out. And so people became even more vulnerable than they were in the first place. And that's when you saw, some of you have probably seen these caravans of thousands of Hondurans who are trying to head to the United States. And it's this like series of vulnerabilities, right, that make people just desperate to go somewhere where they can actually survive. So poverty is number one. Number two, the other thing that I want to talk about is violence. Central America has really, really high rates of violence. Even though I want to say the vast majority of people, 99% of the people in Central America are peace-loving, they are chill, have absolutely nothing to do with the violence that's happening, except that they are caught up in it as bystanders. And it's impossible to get out of the way often. And there are a couple of causes for the violence, especially in the Northern Triangle. And the first one is, unfortunately, drug trafficking. And I'll just give you a little history lesson here. In the 80s, people in the United States discovered cocaine. and they liked it. And cocaine use grew very quickly in the US, and it dropped off for a little while, and now it's going back up again. And all the cocaine in the world is produced in South America, in Bolivia, Peru, and Colombia. Most of the cocaine in the world is sold to consumers in the United States. So what's in the middle between South America and North America is Central America. And there's no way for the people producing cocaine in South America to get to the United States without passing through somewhere. And that somewhere has been the countries of Central America, especially the Northern Triangle. And you know, that kind of business brings an incredible amount of violence. It's drug traffickers trying to establish their route, and they do that through violence, and then keep competitors out, and they use violence to keep competitors out. So in order to hold on to their route, there's just all kinds of violence that happens. They kill people who get in their way, they kill people who won't cooperate. And the second thing is that contributes to the high levels of violence is our gangs. Unfortunately, there are a really high presence of gangs in Central America, and most of them control poor neighborhoods. And the way that they control them is by establishing what they call a war tax or rent. If I own a little store, I have to give part of my earnings to the gang. If I don't, I may be killed, I may have my store burned down. The buses have to pay rent to the gangs. Taxis have to pay rent to the gangs. In some neighborhoods, they go house to house, and everybody has to pay rent to the gangs, or bad things will happen. And in the face of that kind of violence, where people are completely innocent, not complicit in any way in the violence, but so impacted by it, it's something that very much pushes people out of these countries. And then the third thing I want to mention is corruption. And corruption is kind of connected to the other two in some ways. Drug traffickers look for countries where authorities are willing to be bought, where they're willing to cooperate in exchange for money. And after a while, the drug traffickers just kind of take control of the situation. And the authorities have been so co-opted that they stop doing their jobs. So they're not strengthening the institutions of government. They're not making sure the public schools are good schools, or that the public hospitals are good hospitals. And instead, they're stealing the money out of the budgets and putting it in their pocket, because they've lost all sense of kind of what their vision should be for the country. So corruption and the lack of accountability for authorities is another thing that has contributed to poverty, it's contributed to the violence, and it's something that pushes people out of the country. And then I want to mention one more push factor, and this is a positive one, and I think in my experience watching people make these very hard decisions, the fourth thing I would say that encourages people to leave and seek their lives elsewhere is love. And that clearly does not go with the first three, but so many times the decision to leave is based on the fact that I love my children so much and I cannot give them a life here. So I'm going to go try and find a place where I can do that. I love my parents so much and I'm so worried for them. I'm going to go and try and find a life elsewhere and be able to help. And if any of you are inclined, you could look at the amount of money that people in Central America send back to their loved ones, and it's an astonishing amount of money. I mean, people go because they want their family to be okay, even if it means that they're giving up a lot of things. So I think love is one of the things, one of the prime motivators. So those are some of the push factors that are making people leave. And the question for today is, what can we do about those push factors? How can we help people to be able to stay in their own countries, be able to flourish in their countries? And I like this question because it's the things that we talk about all the time with our college students, in our organization. And I think if we want to really make a difference, if we really want to make it so that people can flourish, we have to take on these three problems head on. We have to look at poverty and violence, and corruption. And whatever we do to try to help has to be trying to target those things. So I'll just throw out some ideas, some of the things that I've been involved with or I know that other people are doing. So first, at the community level, a lot of the things that I mentioned that are going wrong are happening at the community level. And so when you try to help, if you're looking at ways to help at the community level, then think about those issues. So what can I do to impact levels of poverty? Well, you could look for nonprofits that are working in income generation projects, trying to find ways that people can make money, that they can provide for their families. You can look for ways to improve schools so that kids get a decent education and then are able to get a decent job. The whole issue of violence, there are really cool programs in a lot of places and in a lot of countries that are trying to target specifically at-risk youth and their families. They're providing safe places where kids can go and learn and play, and they're providing mentors for these kids where they can have somebody who cares about them, who is going to be there for them, and who is trying to speak into their lives. And leadership programs in communities, anti-violence programs, people who take on a leadership role and are willing to push back against these scary people who are trying to take over the neighborhood. And sometimes those programs can have a tremendous impact in communities. So that's at the community level. At the country level, I think that there's all kinds of things you can do as well. And most of them, in my mind, need to focus on how you can make the institutions stronger in a country. So, and there's lots of ways to do that as well. There are organizations who are trying to figure out how can we make the justice system stronger in these countries? How can we make it so that those who are corrupt and who are stealing or who are involved in drug trafficking actually go to trial and then they go to prison? How can we make the justice system stronger? How can we make the education system stronger so that the government is actually putting money into public schools? How can we make the public hospitals stronger? And there are organizations that pick a specific topic and they do these things. And what's cool about that is that if we can work at that level and get institutions stronger, government institutions stronger, then we can help millions. Honduras, just one country, Honduras, has 2 million public school kids out of a population of 8 million total. So if we can get the institutions to be doing their job and to be providing good education to people, then you've just impacted a huge amount of people. So yeah, working on all these things that are targeting the corruption and the violence at a nationwide level or a regional level in Central America. And then the last thing, and I know this is not everybody's thing, and I get that, it's not always my thing either, but the truth is that Central America sits right on the United States doorstep. We are neighbors, and our politics are intertwined, our economies are intertwined, and the decisions that are made in Washington have an impact on Central America. And I know a lot of times it's like, that is not my thing. I like, one-on-one. I like the personal connection. And that is awesome, and I am like that as well. But I also have learned that I need to pay attention to what's happening because it's affecting these people I'm having one-on-one relationships with. And for example, right now, we have a new administration that has just rolled out an immigration reform bill. And I did a little digging and found out that in this immigration reform bill, there is a good chunk of money that is being earmarked for looking hard at the push factors that are making people leave. So the things I just mentioned, poverty, violence, and corruption. And this money is supposed to be spent not by the corrupt governments themselves, but by nonprofits who are trying to do these things of strengthening institutions, calling out corruption. I'm excited about that. I think that there is plenty of good things we can do with that money. And, the cool thing is that if we use that money to help other countries, and I understand that there are so many needs in the United States as well, but if we use that money in these countries and we can help these countries to flourish, then that also helps our relationships with each other, our trade relationships. People are going to buy goods from the US. It works both ways. So when we all can get stronger, that's good for everybody. So yeah, learning what your government is doing and then encouraging them to do the right thing when you find out what that is, I think is, that takes time, but it's a really big piece of this puzzle. And the last thing I think is something that Women of Welcome are doing really well and trying to do well, and that is, again, this concept of love and loving our neighbor. And I love the story in Luke where the expert in the law comes to Jesus and says, "What do I need to be saved?" And Jesus says, "Well, what do you think you need to do to be saved?" And the expert, relying on his knowledge of Scripture, says, "I need to love God and I need to love my neighbor." And Jesus says, "Yes, that is the correct answer." And I just love how those two things are given as two sides of the same coin. They're of a piece. If we love our neighbor, that's how we're loving God. And God expects us to love our neighbor right up there the way that we love him. And Central Americans are definitely the neighbors of the United States. They are the people that the Bible says that we are supposed to love. They are also still our neighbors when they cross the border because they can't see any other alternative. And recognizing that God's command to love our neighbor holds for when people are in their home countries and when they've crossed the border and they are not anymore. And, I think that's the main goal, right? We need to be people of love in fulfilling God's command. So that's what I've got.
That's what you got. Well, I feel like I have just so many questions that I would just love to ask you. And one of them is sometimes when you start thinking about investing someplace other than the U.S., like you said, there's lots of needs in the U.S. There's a lot of vulnerable populations in the U.S. And we have another video about that. So if you're wondering about prioritizing U.S. needs, we've got a video about that in this entire education portal. So you can find that video and we'll talk about that as well. But and then you start to think, okay, so where does my dollar go? And what is my real moral obligation to help in another country versus my own country? And I think you kind of answered that, and that there's this not country mindset, but this kingdom mindset of when we see a need and we feel called or we feel compelled or we feel moved by the Spirit to enter into that, it's meeting a kingdom need instead of necessarily a country need. But what would you say to that? What is our moral obligation to send an investment over to another country when we know there's lots of needs in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think that is a great question. And, if we go back to this passage in Luke where Jesus is talking to the expert in the law, as soon as he says, yes, that's the right answer, he launches right into the story of the Good Samaritan. And, the Samaritan was other. He was not part of the in-group that this expert in the law was part of, right? He was an outcast. And I think that what God is trying to tell us when he tells us to love our neighbor, and he makes it pretty clear that our neighbor is not just the person who's right next door to us, is that, the kingdom of God embraces all of us, like you said, Bree, and also when others flourish, then we also flourish. That's how we are able also to feel God's love. That's how we are able to form relationships. So, yeah, I understand this question of but there's so many needs here, and I live in this country, not in that other country. And I do get that. I think I would also say that the vast majority of your tax dollars do stay right in the United States, and the percentage that is spent on, aid to other countries it's pretty small. I'm not going to give you a percentage because I'll get it wrong. But it is helping the other countries, but then it's also helping, as I said, it's helping the U.S. Having stable neighbors is really important as part of our strategy as a country. So it's also achieving that.
So let me ask you this. I've got a couple questions on that too. So sometimes you think, okay, it's a never ending need. It's like my donation or my investment is just like a drop in the ocean. Does it really make a difference? And I think you've seen that investments in the region make a very big difference. And if folks are feeling very uncomfortable about folks migrating in such big droves to the US for whatever reason, you really do have to take concern and make investment to prevent that from happening and to stabilize a country so that the need isn't there to migrate. But when you look at this and it just feels like this never ending need, what would you say to someone who'd be like, my investment of whatever, $25, whatever it may be, just feels like a drop in the ocean? Does it really make a difference in the grand scheme of violence and corruption and poverty? What would you say to that?
Yeah. Oh, so many things I could say to that. Number one, you're right. It is a very small thing. And we encourage our really passionate college students to pick one thing and then commit to that and see it through. We also just really believe that it is really hard, but it's not too hard. Like God tells us that these things, we can help bring about the kingdom of God. God makes that really clear in the Bible, and we are supposed to. So then I think that we're not allowed to be cynical about, it's impossible. I'll just be throwing my money away because it's what we're commanded by God to do. And just in our experience with our organization, ASJ, the Association for a More Just Society, we started teeny tiny without really a good sense of what we were doing. But we have learned and grown, and a good chunk of our money just comes from ordinary people in the U.S. who believe in what we're doing and have some kind of passion for the country of Honduras, because this organization only works in Honduras. And we started really small, and we started just try and figure out, like, what is going on? Why is the government not doing what it should be doing for the vulnerable people of Honduras? And we started to find that there were lots of people within the government who did want to do the right thing, but just couldn't do it on their own. So we kind of do we will help you as much as we can if you want to really try and make a difference and do the right thing within your government position. And when you don't, and when you're stealing money or you're just ignoring needs, then we're going to hold a press conference and we're going to just tell everybody about it. And we're going to say your name and call you out and hold you accountable. And, at the beginning, not that many people came to our press conferences. Now, when we hold a press conference, lots of people come because they know they're going to get, the real dirt on what's happening. And we do really, really lots of research before we would hold a press conference so that we know exactly what we're talking about. And, our organization has grown. God has blessed the work. And a couple of years ago, we were able to kind of push forward a purge of the Honduran police that ended up, I think it was something like 60% of police officers were removed from their positions, and they've been replaced by new recruits who are passionate about what they're doing, they're better trained, and we tried to dismantle this kind of whole hierarchy of corruption within the police. And it's made a difference, and nothing is ever permanent, so you got to keep on top of it and keep trying to make sure that the institution of the police remains uncorrupted. But, it's an example of the kind of things that I think if you have some vision and some passion, you can make a big difference with not necessarily that much money.
So let me ask you this. How do you make a good investment in Central America? I mean, you've got charity versus development versus justice versus where do you even start to think about how do I make a good investment?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And there's no, pat answer for that. I think that one thing that's important is to do your research. And I think sometimes we're impulsive with our gifts and, something catches our eye and we say, I'm going to send them a check. And, that's not really being good stewards of our resources, right? And one of the things that I'm kind of passionate about is that people understand there are lots and lots of different child sponsorship organizations. And I think that a lot of people believe that they're all the same. Like all child sponsorship is the same thing. You know, you write your check and that check goes to a child. And the truth is that pretty much nobody will turn your money right over to the child that you have on your refrigerator, because that's not a good way to help people. And really, child sponsorship is a way to do fundraising, and it's a perfectly legitimate way to do fundraising, but it really doesn't tell you anything about what's happening with that money. So World Vision does child sponsorship and uses that money to do mostly rural community development. Compassion uses that money to do leadership training, after school programs, like really focusing on how to build up children. Both really good programs, but completely different from each other. And I think, you know, oftentimes with our college students, I'll say, you know, how many of you have sponsored a child? And they raise their hand. Sometimes they know which organization, sometimes they don't. But literally no one has any idea like exactly what's happening to help that child. So I think it's really important to be good stewards of your money, to spend some time looking into it, call people and ask questions about where your money is going if you do want to give. And, you know, as much as possible, try to figure out how to give in ways that are going to affect those areas of poverty, violence, and corruption, because that's what's making people you know, unable to stay in their countries.
So what are you looking for? You are looking for like long-term investment of an organization in one of those three areas. Is that what you're really looking for when you're kind of doing your research?
Well, you mean what a person who wants to give? Yeah, right. So do your research, find out like exactly how are you going to use my money? What's it going to be for? Can you show me what impact it has had? How long of a track record do you have? Yeah, so yeah, in doing your research, I think what I'm saying is look for impact. Look for things that you think, well, that makes sense, that this would really help a child. And I'm not a big fan of like, you know, handing out school supplies to all the kids in the neighborhood. Like, that's a good thing to do, but it's not a sufficient thing to do to change people's lives. So yeah, look for things that are more long-term impacting in the lives of the people who are vulnerable in these countries.
Like systemic stuff that has like a long game objective.
Yes, yeah, I would say, right. So systemic, so if we go back to my suggestions, at the community level, it's gonna look different, right? Then look for organizations that are mostly staffed by the people of that country, because they're gonna stick around. And they're gonna put down roots, and they are gonna understand the community. And then, you know, look for them doing things that are really gonna impact in those areas. So, for example, I don't like to give examples of like, I wouldn't do this, but you know, an example of a feeding center, for example, for kids. That's not a bad thing, but it's also not really trying to target these kind of long-term problems that need to be chipped away at and solved.
Okay, that's good. That's a good nuance. I'm going to switch up a little bit on you in my questioning, because I have just a flurry of them since you're in that region. You know, there are a lot of people who leave, and you said you've known friends that have left and who have prayed with you about leaving, have told you just the struggle that they've had about whether or not they should leave. They're in conflict, they don't want to leave. And I guess one of my questions is, I think a lot of people in America think, don't they know what the journey is? Why would they come if it was such a treacherous journey and it's so horrible and so all these things happen? And we have just kind of information at our fingertips about how bad the journey is and how dangerous it is and how unlikely it is that when you present at the border, you're actually going to maybe even get across because of border security and all of the things. So tell us, what do people know about the journey?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And I have a good friend, David, who went to the States probably a decade ago now. And his plan was to go for 3 years, He left his wife and little baby behind. And he went, took the train, crossed the desert. It was really terrible. Bad things happened to him along the way. He was robbed. Women in the group were raped. And the reason he was going was to get enough money to buy a truck, buy welding tools, and to buy the little house that they were trying to rent, but often couldn't even make rent for. And he was going to come back in 3 years. And nobody believed him at the time. And they would tell his wife, oh, he's already, found somebody else. And that was not the case. He came back 3 years later. And he told me once that it's hard to talk to people about what happens on the journey, because if they're already thinking about going, they don't want to hear those stories. So I think there is a general knowledge that the journey is hard, and that bad things can happen to you. But I think when people are already so afraid, they don't necessarily want to hear all the details about that. So I'm not sure that everybody who goes knows as much as they should about how difficult this journey is. And honestly, it just has gotten more and more and more difficult as, the United States and the bordering countries try and figure out ways to make it even harder. So it has become more treacherous. The places you can cross are more dangerous to cross. Jumping on the train is more dangerous than it used to be. So I think that the fact that people are still going despite all that, and despite hearing stories from those who are deported or those who get injured, is just testament to the fact that things have to be pretty bad if you're still going to try and make that journey. And as you said, not even knowing if you're going to make it or not.
Right. And you've told me stories about friends in your community that have have sacrificed everything. They've sold a house, they've paid a coyote, they have someone that would then kind of smuggle them up, or at least guide them up to the border, sometimes maybe try and smuggle. And you're just saying sometimes when they don't make it and they come back, tell me about that. Just like you have so many friends that have had multiple experiences about going and working and then coming back, or multiple experiences of going and it just being a trauma-filled experience, and then they come back to nothing.
Yes, and if you want to increase your chances of getting over successfully, you have to hire someone. Coyote, that person is called, who will help you get over. And the going rate for that is anywhere between $6,000 and $10,000. I've had people tell me, I don't understand why people don't just pay the cost of their visa. Why do they want to go illegally so they, can avoid this $50 they'd have to spend for a visa? And I'm like, if only, there was a way that people could go get a visa in order to work in the United States. But, clearly that is not what happens. And so, people invest, they take out loans, they sell whatever they have, and then when they're turned back, that money is just gone, right? So it's again, I think just an example of how desperately people want to leave sometimes, especially when, they've been targeted by gangs or drug traffickers, and they are fleeing for their lives, or they are just so desperately poor that, they can't see any kind of future for themselves.
Right. And I mean, even just as Americans, we don't understand our immigration policy very well. I mean, it's very confusing. It's very complex. And so it's to expect someone who's in another country, several thousand miles away, to kind of understand the nuances and the dynamics of that. They've just heard that someone got across, or someone was allowed to seek asylum, or whatever. They've heard a positive story that gives them hope, that covers the horrible feeling that they have where they are, that they just feel like they can't survive and thrive. And a lot of times it's just, what I've been told is just very confusing. Sometimes, the U.S. has they have two signs, right? Help wanted, stay out. Help wanted, stay out. And so, again, we say at Women of Welcome all the time is that we are not promoting, or we're not proponents of illegal crossing or illegal immigration. What we're trying to right now is talk about why the migration happens, and the desperation that people feel to provide a better life for their families or for themselves, and how there's just a lot of misinformation. It's not like everyone's sitting around paying attention to U.S. policy. It changes all the time. Sometimes it changes on the daily in the last several years in the U.S. And so you just think, okay, if there's a lot of misinformation about that, and they've heard of a friend who was able to send money back and was able to provide a job and a house, and you're sitting there thinking, there's no way for me to work here because of natural disasters, because of violence, because of poverty, because of opportunity, education, you name it, then you just start to feel more compassionate, or at least I hope you would, feel more compassionate as to why people are presenting at the border.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, two important points to make about that, Bree, is that there are jobs, and most people find jobs when they get to the States. There are jobs available. And the way the system is now, it's pretty broken, right? So you can go over without any papers, without any visa, and you can find a job. And for a long time, you'll be fine, and so will your employer, who will not get in trouble for that. But also, it's very difficult as an unskilled worker to get a visa to come to the States legally. So I sometimes talk to our students about it and say, what if you lived in Michigan and the economy was absolutely disastrous, and right over the border in Indiana, you knew you could find a job like that, but you weren't supposed to go. Your kids are starving, they're being threatened. Clearly, I know this is not legal, but also it's right there, and I am trying to provide for my family. So it's partly the way that our system is set up that, like you said, help wanted, stay out is both there at the same time. And when you're desperate, you see the help wanted, and the stay out part, it takes less of a priority for you because, you're so desperate.
Right. And I think most people don't understand that one of the solutions to this could be that you could apply in country to come into the U.S. And we don't do that. A lot of people say you should just apply at a U.S. embassy for a visa or for whatever else it is. Just apply to come and then just wait in line like everybody else. And we have another video in this education portal about U.S. immigration policy with Jenny Yang. So feel free to watch that one because we talk about this as well. But there are really only certain lanes that you can get into. And sometimes the line is very broken in that lane. And so if there's not an option for you and you're desperate, it's like trying to put yourself in their shoes of, all right, it's there and so many people do it, and it's a little bit confusing because I'm being pulled in by the work that's available, but I'm being pushed out because there's a border security situation there and a law that I'm breaking, and yet I'm trying to hold the mandate of feeding my family and providing for them versus obeying laws. And so it just gets a little bit more gray. And again, it's not that we're proposing that everybody come and just cross legally to illegally to take on jobs. It's just a little bit more complicated than what most people think. And no, there is not a way to apply in country to go and do the things that these folks are doing. And there's not visas for low-skilled jobs. You have to have high education, high skills, be sponsored by an employer. And when you look at the dynamics in the community of the Northern Triangle, there's just very few, if any, of those kind of higher education, high-skilled jobs in order to get visas. And even those visas are so limited. There's only, Jenny Yang said, there's only 5,000 of those visas in that line. So think about the entire world and the rest of the global community that has access to education and all of these other things. I mean, it's really stacked against you. So your options are very limited.
Yeah. And, I should probably make it clear that although I am presenting, what makes people want to leave, my husband and I, from the get-go, made it our policy to never encourage anyone to go, to never provide any funds for anyone to go, because it is illegal and it's so dangerous. So, we say stay and let's see what we can do to try and keep you safe, to keep you working. But the honest truth is that it is very difficult. So I have compassion and I have empathy, and from living here, I understand these reasons. But I also don't think it's okay to cross illegally. I also don't think it's okay for employers to hire people that they know don't have any documents and who very seldom get into trouble. And I'm sure that's in another video, but it is a kind of one-sided penalty at the moment. And that's why I'm excited about immigration reform, because I think that we could find a way to do this in a way that helps everybody, that builds everybody up. I don't think that it is a, we win, you lose kind of situation. So,
Joanne, you've been so incredibly helpful. I've got one last question for you, and that is we constantly talk about, and we're engaging women with what some of these pressure points are and these pain points of why people are coming, and sometimes it really can look like, man, the Northern Triangle is just this really violent, corrupt, like this horrible place. Talk to us about the danger of a one-sided story, because while that is true, and again, we have another video where we're just talking about, like, we need to think globally about immigration, not just, we usually just tend to think about the southern border and, Central and South America because they're south of us and they're the closest to us and whatnot. But there is a global immigration challenge that we have. But I mean, in any of these countries, when we're talking about refugees or if we're talking about migrants from south of the border, there is this danger of painting a country in a one-sided way. Talk to us about that, because you obviously, so looking at you, you're a white woman from America, born in the Midwest, and you're down in Honduras. And yet all of the narrative that we keep talking about is how dangerous it is. Like, Joanne, what are you doing down in Honduras? And what you would say is?
Yeah, I mean, I get that question all the time, and even more when we were raising our children here and living in a
what are
really
you
poor
doing?
neighborhood. Yeah. And I think, absolutely, I hate that one-sided narrative, and I feel a little bit about like that's what I have been saying right now, because I am talking about these push factors, but it is so much bigger than that, right? And living in Central America for us for the past 30 years has been the absolute opposite of painful and a burden. It has been just an incredible blessing because of the people that we get to hang around with. And the women in my church, they have difficult lives, but they have taught me so much about what it means to follow God, what faith really is. People persevere, and there is so much beauty in relationships here, in the creativity that people have. It is absolutely not all bad. And, it's sad because people in Central America hear internationally only the bad things about their own countries. And I am telling you that has an impact on people's souls, on their hearts, to hear all the bad stuff, how dangerous everything is. And that isn't who, as I said, 99% of the people, that's not who they are, and that's not the way they want to think about their country. And there's all kinds of, just amazing things going on that you can get involved in. And my husband and I just chose to not live in fear, and we really didn't. Neither did our children. We all just kind of leaned into the amazing experience that was living here and being able to be part of community here and to understand a little bit at least about what makes people tick, what makes these communities tick, and there's just so many good things. And that's why I'm so passionate about making some of these bad things go away so that people can flourish even more, because that's what they want to do. I mean, Hondurans, man, and Central Americans, they persevere. They are not a give up kind of people, which is why, I mean, if you give up, you don't make that really dangerous journey in search of something better, right? The people who do that are the people who have hope, who do want to find something better, and they want to benefit their entire families by doing so, and that's who lives in Central America for the most part. It's people that just, they're can-do kind of people. That word vulnerable, there don't want it to mean weak, because there there is not weakness. There is such strength. People are so much more than the bad things that have happened to them. And, the only way that you can find out what the story of someone's life is by seeking them out. And it's not always easy to do, but it is always worth it. In my experience, it's always a blessing. And we come out having new relationships and better understanding what it is that God is asking us to do when He asks us to love our neighbor.
Thank you so much, Joe. You have given us so much to think about, so many great answers, and we're thankful for what you and your husband are doing. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Bree. It's been fun.